I can't decide if it's my great honor or my great pleasure to introduce our next speaker. It's certainly a delight. Amelia Frank-Vitale tread and footsteps that a lot of ICWA fellows have tried, and her success was certainly remarkable, looking at Mexico as a platform for migration. It's become an enormously important story. Her newsletters fill me with admiration and information at the same time. I was thinking this morning of the one you did called the Busqueda, about the women from Central America who travel throughout Mexico looking for children that they have not heard from in some cases decades. I mean, it's just a remarkable bit of reporting, and this was true almost every month when I got my local copy to mark up and try to find shortcomings, which were difficult to do, although I think I did a couple of times. And Amelia has a wonderful presentation for us this morning. As with the previous speaker, Shannon, we will take questions, and please welcome Amelia Frank-Vitale.
Good morning. Thank you so much. Thank you to ICWA for this extraordinary fellowship, and thank you all for being here this morning to hear me talk a little bit about migration in Mexico. In Olanchito, Honduras, I went to the funeral for a 15-year-old. Let's call him Nelson. He had stolen a bike, so someone killed him. No one knew for sure who had killed him, but everyone knew who the likely suspects were, and everyone knew why he had been killed. The funeral was typical of the poor in Latin America. The body was displayed inside the house of a neighbor. The woman who raised Nelson wailed in the corner. He had been given away at birth to a friend of the family, her daughters lightly patting her arms and shoulder. 10 or 15 people were seated near the wailing woman and the body of her adopted son. Packed into the house's small living room, they were all silent mostly, suffocating in the sweltering heat. The smell of sweat and tears mingled with the unmistakably sickly sweet odor of decomposition. The poor don't have money for embalming, or making up the recently deceased to appear like he's sleeping peacefully. The body, looking smaller than a teenager's, laid out in a simple wooden box, had a slight trickle of blood running from its already yellowing nose. People at the funeral whispered amongst themselves. When blood runs from the nose of a body at the funeral, it means the person responsible for the murder is present. Though that's pure superstition, it's not improbable that Nelson's murderer would have been there. He was likely part of the same community in this small town. He may also have showed up to check on what was being said, and making sure no one named names. The murder of a young person is always a tragic thing, but mixed in among the sadness and the grief was something even more tragic: resignation and fear. His family members were sad, of course, deeply, deeply sad at the loss of this young man. But they weren't shocked. They weren't surprised. Well, his family said, what did he expect? He was a thief. And they were scared of making a fuss beyond simply burying their dead. They didn't want anyone else in the family to join Nelson in the graveyard. While I was in Mexico, studying Central American migration, Honduras became the country with the highest intentional homicide rate in the world. Mexico is thought of as being a pretty dangerous place right now, with a high murder rate in many parts of the country. Yet Mexico's murder rate pales in comparison to Honduras's, whose homicide rate is nearly 5 times that of Mexico. Mexico, in 2012, had a murder rate of just over 20 per 100,000 people. Honduras's murder rate, when it earned its dubious distinction in that same year, was just over 90 per 100,000 people. To put that into perspective a bit, in the US in 2012, DC was the 8th most murderous city among cities with a population of over 500,000. Its rate was just under 14 per 100,000 people. Detroit topped the list that year, with just under 55 murders per 100,000 people. San Pedro Sula, Honduras' second major city and its economic center, is now the world's deadliest city. In 2012, its murder rate was more than 3 times that of Detroit, with 169 murders per 100,000 people. The World Health Organization considers a murder rate in double digits to be an epidemic. DC, Detroit, and Mexico would all qualify under this rubric. So it's hard to really comprehend a homicide rate as high as Honduras's. But But the story of the young bicycle thief's funeral helps to illustrate it. A teenager was killed for stealing a bike, and he and his family members knew that stealing a bike could likely get him killed. No one went to the police about the stolen bicycle, nor about the young man's murder. Killing is how problems are dealt with now in Honduras, especially among the poor. Brutal street gangs, known as maras, have practically taken over in Honduras. They are gangs of poor young men mostly, and they use brutal violence to control their neighborhoods and fight off rival gangs. They extort, abuse, torture, maim, rape, and kill with little fear of ever being put in jail. In their neighborhoods, they exact renta from all small businesses, even the older lady selling tortillas out of her front yard, and those who don't pay are threatened and murdered. In a poor neighborhood of Tegucigalpa, called Flor del Campo, I spent some time with Elena and her family. A devout Christian woman in her 40s, she had a nervous energy about her, like a woman always on edge. A few days before my visit, the father of one of her nieces had been killed, leaving his young daughter in Elena's care. She stroked the little girl's head as she told me that her father had been a delivery man for a pizza company. He had a small motorbike that he used to make deliveries, and someone wanted that bike. So they murdered him and took his bike. Elena's own son had gone to the United States years earlier when the Mara started recruiting him. He didn't want to join, so the recruitment turned to harassment and serious threats. Elena had not seen her son in nearly 10 years when I spoke with her. She preferred this, though, knowing that he was alive and safe. If she saw him in person in Honduras again, she feared for his life. Now her daughter, Paola, has 2 young sons of her own who are approaching the age where the Mara starts to recruit, 10 years old or so. Both mother and daughter worry about the options ahead for this young family. They both know that before long, Paola and her sons might have to try and join her brother in the United States. But murder is not only a tool of the Maras in Honduras. It's not just one gang killing the members of a rival gang. Murder has become common, normalized, accepted. Fans of rival soccer teams kill each other in Tegucigalpa. A young Honduran man, Milton, explained life in San Pedro Sula to me one day as we sat on the railroad tracks in Huehuetoca, outside Mexico City. Look, he said, it's like this. If a buddy of mine tells me how he doesn't really like this other guy we know, I may kill the other guy to show my buddy that I'm really his friend. As Milton was telling me this, he pulled up his t-shirt to show me the scars of bullet wounds on his back and chest from the many times people had tried to kill him. He was 21 years old. It's important to understand how commonplace murder is in Honduras in order to understand trans-immigration in Mexico. Each year, an estimated 400,000 Central Americans enter Mexico without papers in hopes of reaching the United States. The majority of these migrants are now from Honduras, some estimate around 80%, with smaller numbers from El Salvador, Guatemala, and Nicaragua. In Mexico, migrants face a gauntlet to make it from the southern border to the northern one. After crossing into Mexico from Guatemala, by far the easiest part of the journey, many migrants will board one of the freight trains that carry materials and goods across Mexico. They ride on top of these trains across at least 1,200 miles of Mexican territory. It's a journey that is, at very best, about 10 days long. In most cases, though, migrants will take longer, weeks or even months, to get to the border Mexico shares with the United States. Clinging to the top of an old freight train as it barrels across fields, over mountains, and through tunnels is not as fun as it might sound. After only a few hours, your legs and arms get sore from holding on so tightly. Your body tires, but falling asleep is the most dangerous thing you can do. Falling off the moving train often results in the loss of limbs or death under the steel wheels of this train known as the beast, La Bestia. The sun beats down on you, and the metal boxcars reflect the light and heat back up, baking you from both sides. The wind generated by the swiftly moving cars provides some momentary relief from the heat, though your skin still cracks under the unrelenting sun. But that same wind chills you to the bone in colder regions and during the night. You're exposed to all the elements, rain and hail along with sun and cold, and you also have to dodge low-hanging branches and bees' nests. Leaving the state of Veracruz, the train passes through a series of long tunnels. The black smoke of the train's engine fills the tunnel and your lungs, stinging your eyes and blackening your clothes and skin. I've ridden the train myself, and I've experienced the sore arms and legs, the dizzying sun, and the overwhelming fatigue firsthand. I've never ridden through the tunnels or the freezing patches in the mountains, but many migrants have described that part of the journey to me. The dangers of freight train travel, though many, are not the only ones facing migrants on their journey across Mexico. To the contrary, the physical dangers associated with this precarious form of travel pale in comparison to the dangers presented by the drug cartels and those who back them. From the moment migrants enter Mexico, they turn into dollar signs. Migrants are merchandise, a commodity to be delivered, a resource to be exploited. They are overcharged bus fare by drivers. They are overcharged for food by street vendors. The few belongings they carry with them are subject to theft at every turn. And if they work a day or two here and there, they are paid far less than Mexicans. Olban, a migrant from Honduras who had a humanitarian visa in Mexico, worked all day clearing the fields for a rancher near Ixtepec. At the end of the day, when the Mexicans were given 300 pesos, Olban was only given 100. The unfairness stung him, but he still went back to work for the same man every day for nearly a month. Some money to send back to his children in Honduras is better than nothing, Olban reasoned. All along the route migrants take to cross Mexico, people in small towns by the train tracks make a living off the migrants who pass through. People charge migrants to bathe in their yards, to sleep on their concrete floors, extra for cardboard to lay down on, extra for a blanket, extra for a pillow, extra for a meal. Sometimes the prices are fair, but often they charge a high price for meager offerings. These kinds of exploitation are unfortunate and frustrating, but they generally aren't life-threatening. But migrants are dollar signs for the organized crime groups that operate in Mexico as well, and for this the trip gets truly dangerous. It starts when migrants first try to board a train. They are charged $100 per person by the gang that controls that town, often affiliated with the Zeta drug cartel. And those who cannot pay are not allowed to travel. Sometimes they are just made to get off the top of the boxcar. Sometimes they are thrown off while the train is in motion, an example to other migrants who might dare to ride for free. There are 4 points where this quota or dues payment is demanded. 4 points before migrants get through the southern state of Veracruz. From here, they still have more than half of Mexico to get through. In other cases, migrants are targeted for kidnapping by the Zeta cartel. A few years ago, they used to wait for the train to stop and load all the migrants at gunpoint into waiting trucks. They take 100 or so people at a time and hold them for months while they beat them and force them to make phone calls to their family members for ransom money. $4,000 to $5,000 per person was generally the required amount to secure one's release. Those who couldn't pay were pressed into service or killed, the remains tossed into unmarked mass graves, or dissolved in barrels of acid, according to migrant survivors of mass kidnappings. Saul, a shy young man from El Salvador, was kidnapped along with his brother one night as they slept in the brush near the tracks, waiting for a train to come in Veracruz. After being taken away at gunpoint, they were held for nearly 2 months and beaten every day. While they were held, their captors killed 3 of the migrants in the group, rolled their bodies up in a carpet, and left that carpet in the room with the captives. The blood seeping out of the carpet onto the floor was an example to the rest of them. Pay up, or else. Saul and his brother were in worse shape than many migrants. They did not have family waiting for them in the United States who could raise the $4,500 ransom their kidnappers were demanding. Their only hope was their sister, back in El Salvador, who somehow managed to get together the $9,000 they needed for both of them to be released. Saul, while recounting his ordeal to me later, could not bear to think of what his sister had to do to get her hands on that kind of money. When a decent paying and hard to come by job in El Salvador pays $5 a day, $9,000 is a fortune. Recently, however, the Zetas have changed tactics and moved to targeted kidnappings. They send Zeta members from Central America to infiltrate the migrants aboard the train. Their familiar Central American accents put migrants at ease. They strike up conversation and listen for who has family waiting for them in the United States. Then, when they get to the next stopping point, they signal to the waiting armed men who take the targeted migrants away. Corruption is a problem that plagues Mexico at every level of government. Migrants once again fall victim. There are numerous accounts of immigration agents asking for bribes from migrants in return for the promise of not detaining and deporting them. and sometimes immigration agents are even responsible for handing migrants over to the cartels. Police officials, who are not legally allowed to enforce immigration law in Mexico, except under very specific circumstances, also have a reputation for extorting migrants, most of whom do not know that the police are breaking the law and would likely not turn them over to immigration if a migrant refused to hand over his money. Some migrants, though not all of them, travel with a guide, a pollero or coyote, who leads them through Mexico and generally hands them off to someone else who takes them across the border. In recent years, these networks of people smugglers have all been subjugated to the different drug cartels that control movement across the various sections of the US-Mexico border. Smuggling migrants is now big business. In the early 90s, a migrant could cross the Arizona border for about $25. Now, each migrant pays between $3,000 and $4,000 to get across that borderline. If a migrant hires a pollero to take him all the way from Central America, he'll likely pay $7,000 to $8,000. With hundreds of thousands of migrants trying to get across the border each year, this adds up to serious money for the drug cartels. Recently, one study even estimated that people smuggling has actually surpassed drug smuggling as the primary source of revenue for the drug cartels. It's an important development that the United States ought to take note of. While the U.S.'s security concerns have led it to support Mexico in its fight against the drug cartels, its border policy has pushed an unexpected source of significant revenue into the hands of those same cartels. When the border was less fortified, drug smuggling routes and people smuggling routes were largely separate. They were also separate businesses, and crossing the border itself was a much less time-consuming and life-threatening ordeal for migrants. It was also pretty cheap. U.S. border policy has pushed migration into the more remote areas of the borderlands, the deserts, the mountains, the more rugged terrain, with fewer paths and fewer populated areas close by. This was the idea, to close off the easier routes, intending to make the journey more difficult, and thus serving as a deterrent to would-be migrants. The unintended consequence of border policy, however, is that it has pushed border crossing into the hands of the drug cartels. Two things happened. As undocumented migration moved into more dangerous parts of the border, the prices went up. The specialized knowledge of the terrain required to get people across was scarcer, the trip was longer, and the risks to the coyote became more serious if he were to be caught and identified. So, the prices went up, which made the whole thing a more appealing business venture for the cartels already operating in the borderlands. At the same time, as migrants wandered into ever more remote terrain, they started to come into contact more often with the drug smugglers themselves. Their presence could draw the attention of more law enforcement, something that the cartels generally wanted to avoid. The cartels already had the specialized knowledge of how to get things across the border undetected. As migrants started traipsing into the cartel smuggling routes, and those migrants themselves became pricier merchandise, the cartels expanded their business and took over the people smuggling networks. This development is not good for the United States' own security agenda. It's also not been good for migrants. Whereas polleros used to rely on word of mouth and building a good reputation within their community to secure repeat business, the cartels care little about what is said back home. The coyotes themselves are underlings within the cartel hierarchy. If one of them is caught in jail, the cartels have others waiting in the wings. The migrants themselves are even more disposable. Even if a few migrants out of a group of 15 or 20 die trying to make the arduous trek across the desert, for example, the cartel doesn't really lose that much. There will be other migrants to take their place soon enough. And since they control the crossing, it's not like migrants can simply choose another coyote. Despite all of these dangers in Mexico, migrants keep coming. Most migrants know what's in store for them, long before they begin the journey. The decision to try their luck is a calculated one. As an older hunter and migrant told me, I risk my life walking out my front door every day in Honduras. If they're going to risk their life anyway, they might as well risk it with the chance, the hope, of reaching something better down the road. Staying in Honduras, as they see it, there's little chance of survival, let alone something better. The Central American migrants who traverse Mexico in hopes of making it to the United States are not just going in search of the American dream. They're making a last-ditch effort to save their very lives. People often ask me how to stop this whole migration mess, how to save lives, stop the illegal flow, what the solution might be. More border security, better and less corrupt Mexican enforcement, maybe an education campaign in Central America warning people of the dangers that await them in Mexico. In my own opinion, none of these things will slow the flood of people leaving Central America. In Mexico, I've met migrants from Central America who have been deported from the United States just a few days earlier. They arrived in Honduras or El Salvador and almost immediately turned around to head back north. I've met migrants who have been deported 5 times in a single year and are on their way to try again. Sometimes this is because the threats of violence that spurred a person to migrate are still present as soon as they set foot back in Central America. Sometimes it's because the migrant and his family have gone into debt to pay for the trip. Deportation just means that paying that debt is even harder. If the migrant doesn't try again, the family is likely doomed to be worse off than they were to begin with. As long as staying at home seems like a wholly untenable option, this phenomenon will not cease. The solution to the migration question does not lie in ramped up border enforcement, stricter laws, or more deportations. People will keep coming, dodging cetas and corrupt police, braving a deadly freight train in a deadlier desert, suffering hunger, heat, and cold, as long as their home countries offer them not only no opportunities, but little chance of survival. The solution to the many issues associated with undocumented migration would be to stop it before anyone puts on a backpack and takes a step toward their northern border. Give people in Honduras a reason to stay in Honduras, hope of survival and a chance to thrive, and many would-be migrants would stay put. Many Central Americans would prefer to stay in their home countries rather than make a dangerous trek to a country that is increasingly hostile to their presence. They go because the United States offers them the best chance of survival, of putting their kids through school, and of living a life of stability and security. If they could have found those things in Central America, many migrants tell me they never would have left. We also have to face the reality that migrants who do make it across the border do important jobs in the United States. Though the violence in Central America has perhaps heightened the number of people who are leaving the region, the traditional reasons for migration are still part of the equation. The economic opportunity that working in the United States offers is still a powerful pull factor. Those who want to work should be able to do so legally. Many migrants I have spoken with would be thrilled with a program that allowed them to work in the US for a period of time, then be able to return to their home countries, then return to work again in the United States. They would much prefer to enter legally, avoiding the dangers and costs of traveling through Mexico and clandestinely crossing the border. Absent a visa, however, migrants will continue to try to get into the United States by traveling on freight trains and sneaking through the borderlands. As dangerous as it is, it still represents the only chance many Central Americans have at a safer, better life. My final newsletter closed with the words of a migrant directed to Hermana Leticia Gutierrez, a Scalabrini nun who works to defend and protect migrants in Mexico. I think it's appropriate to share those same words with you now. Tenemos la última moneda, hermana. Se la jugamos, he told her. We are down to our very last penny, sister. Let's gamble with it.